Iowa. Live like 3 blocks from the Mississippi River, so things are nice here. It's 55 and sunny, and we're okay with this, and I hope everybody's holding up pretty well. So a little bit of information about me. I did my undergraduate degree at University of Northern Iowa, and so I did that in athletic training, and then graduated in 2008 with that, and then went to physical therapy school, and been doing that full time while doing the strength and conditioning, performance type stuff. So I graduated with that in 2010. A little bit more of like kind of my experience level too is, so I got into actually high level rugby. And so not only playing, but then also I started to do more of the like covering with from the athletic training, the sports medicine side of it. So I've actually done international matches with the USA women's 15s team. We played England, South Africa, and also Canada when I was with them. And then I also did a residency at the Olympic Training Center in Chula Vista. So kind of seeing that high level, what that high performance mindset looks like, and I think that's one of the things that we've tried to bring to our area, especially in the Quad Cities, which is where I'm at. I would tell you that there's not a great feel for how high level sports is actually taken care of and how it's done. So from our side of it, how do we, encompass that high performance mindset, which is, everybody's part of that big circle. So the athletes in the middle, and then you're going to have, your coach, you're going to have your strength coach, you're going to have your PT, the injury prevention stuff, your sports psychologist, all of those things. And how do we elevate our kids? And I think this is one of the ways that we've done things a little bit differently. And so that's really helped out kind of what we've done. So being part of those experiences are and kind of the reason why we do things the way we do it. I've kind of gotten to the point in my career where I've kind of just stopped saying, let's do things the way we've always done it. Let's kind of go a different path. And that seemed to go pretty well. So I took over an orthopedic, surgery group. So I work for 5 surgeons. And then we have PT and we do sports performance, all that stuff. So it's kind of like our own high performance system all in one. And so from the strength training side of it, I began doing more of the, strength training stuff. I was teaching, it was always a part of my, what I do growing up, with football, and, I played 4 sports in high school. So football or lifting was part of it. So you didn't have a choice. So I started teaching the junior high kids when I started, in college. So all the way through college during the summers, I always did the younger kids. So like our, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders or whatever. And then got into PT school, and then I just kept going and doing more strength conditioning. And about 3 years ago, another guy and we just decided that it was time to kind of go out on our own and do it the way we thought it should be done. So we started an athlete development project 3 years ago. We went from like our first, right away, we had 5 teams at Augustana College, which is a D3 school in our area. And now we've grown to, two schools. And now we're gone up a little bit. So we have about 1,700 athletes that we work with. We work with high schools, colleges, pretty much everything. So it goes pretty well. So so this morning I actually had, I had football players from Eastern Illinois, Kent State, Iowa, and Iowa State all with us. Everybody's kind of just like in a mode where we don't really know what to do. So we're trying to help them out as much as we can. So my presentation is going to be a little bit different from what I think a lot of you guys may have heard, or like it's not going to be specific X's and O's type stuff in terms of the football specific stuff. From my side, it's how do we make people stronger? And I've helped out some different colleges and different things, different sports in terms of that. But then also, how do we decrease that risk of injury? And so we can't really have no injury risk. I mean, that's just inherent, especially like with football. Kids are getting into a car accident pretty much every weekend. So how do we decrease that risk? What can we do to make them stronger? Things that we do know is those that have improved stability and strength and stability, those are going to be the kids that usually, by and large, have a decreased risk for injury. Some of the research and some of the things that are going on right now is how do we predict some of that? I was actually on a conference call and Zoom meeting with people from Sparta Science. And so then that's some of the stuff that they're trying to do is how do they look at these injury rates? And this is some of the stuff they do. And so the other thing also is to increase that eccentric strength. We know that it improves our deceleration. So a lot of times with people that are having knee injuries, they are the ones that are not being able to control that deceleration. So having better eccentric control and strength and stability, that is the best way. Especially with knee injuries, we know that like ACLs, we're having, especially in the United States, it can be 150,000 of these every year. So people are saying that that's an epidemic. Well, how do we decrease that? And how do we, improve what people are doing? And this is, one of the things we do. So from from my standpoint, and I have a program up here. Can everybody see that?
Yeah,
Justin, can they see the program?
Yeah, your all the programs listed. Yes, sir.
Okay, so the one that's sitting up here, and like I have an Excel sheet up. Hopefully people can see that. So this one is just like our basic. And so what we do,
Coach, we could just see the list of all the programs, not the actual. I don't know if you brought one up specifically.
Yeah, I did. Let's see. Let me see if I can. There we go.
You may have to.
Now, can
there you go. Yep, we're good.
Okay, so there's that one. And so this is a program that we use that allows us to have kind of a baseline. So we start out with some specific predictors with all of our athletes. And this can be used for many different programs. So whether if you're a track coach, or if you coach basketball or whatever it might be, at least it kind of gives you an idea of kind of where we start from. So we do this on purpose. So we kind of get a baseline from some of these kids. Like these are the specific things you need to be able to do. We like our rear foot elevated split squats. We like that because especially like when your people are, athletes are running, everything, it's one foot to the other. Same thing if we're cutting, if we're, basketball, football, whatever it might be, we're coming in and out of those cuts. Very rarely are we cutting off the 2 feet. So we really try and do as much single leg strength training as we possibly can. So whether that's, foot up on the bench, or if that's foot up, like a single leg split squat stand, any of those specific things, this is a perfect way to do that. So that's where we usually start out with some of our stuff. And we actually, we've had a good opportunity we've had some players that have gone on and played for the University of Iowa, and Coach Doyle there. I don't know if everybody knows who he is. My guess is yes, but especially in the football strength training world, Coach Doyle is very highly regarded. So we we take our staff up there every year, and we really have some good conversations about where are they going, what are they seeing. So we've kind of molded our stuff a little bit based off of kind of what they do too. So we start our guys out with more of a basic program, and this is every level. So like with me, if I have a kid that comes back and he's doing like he's in the middle of his like high school career, so like say he's a junior or he's a senior, we have kids start out with some of this basic stuff just to kind of get that baseline, so they know the specific movements we want, and then it shows us an idea of like their single leg stability thing. So we have the rear foot elevated split squat. You have TRX rows, so you can do an elevated row, pull a chest to bar type thing. Then we have single leg bridges, so we know that we want to get our glutes engaged as much as we possibly can. Most people, and this is going to come later on in the program too, what we do from our injury prevention side of things and mobility stuff, but we want to have as much, people being able to fire glutes, single leg, as much as we possibly can. So whether that's the TRX or that rear foot elevated split squat, that's our single leg bridges. The next one we have on there is our single leg RDL. And so that single leg RDL gives us a really good, kind of a metric on where people have in terms of single leg balance. But then it also has, some of that coordination in terms of I can get my glute to extend my hip, and then that gets us in that better position. So what we also have on our programs is we have global mobility stuff too. So like with our rear foot elevated split squats, as you can kind of see, it appears that we do like supersets. So we have a rear foot elevated split squat, and then we have our seated groin stretch position. I can show these if we want, if you guys are wanting us to kind of do some of that. But it allows us to really push stability, core control as we're going through those movements. We really try and do as much stability with movement type stuff as allows us to really get in a little bit better position. Sorry, I have a puppy down here too, and he seems like he wants to play with the bell. So that'd be our day one. Our day two is more of our change of direction type day. And then so we have goblet squat. So this goblet squat allows us to have a little bit more control. We usually do some pausing in some of that as well. That pause at the bottom allows us to really see where they come out of that bottom position. What we do see a lot of times, especially kids that don't have a lot of good core control and stability, they'll actually, they hip out. So when they come out of that squat position, they actually move backwards instead of actually coming straight back up. What it's going to do is that, especially when you have kids that are back squatting, whether it's high bar or low bar, it doesn't really necessarily matter. They're going to get a big forward lean. That forward lean is going to get these kids into a position where they have a ton of load on their low back, increases their risk for injury. So we like the goblet squat, front squats, the split squat to all, to kind of help us with that. Squat prep is another position that we use to do some of our global mobility. And so we use that in between our sets. The next one is that half kneeling shoulder press. We like that because that gets us into a half kneeling position, which allows us to then be able to press up, using that core for a little bit more stability. So with that, then we have a reverse lunge, kind of mimics the rear foot elevated split squats to kind of go into having more single leg stability. Dead bugs, which is more of a core position too. It's kind of like a reverse plank type of deal. And then we have our pull-off press as well, just so we have more of that stability with movement. All of those we use kind of as, and not necessarily just as predictors, but also just kind of telling us where does that person and how they move, especially with not knowing what age level each one of you guys work with. So say it's like you have 14-year-olds. Well, 14-year-olds aren't going to move near as well as your 18-year-olds all the time. Sometimes they have a little bit more mobility, but their stability with movement is usually not as good. So this allows us to have a good program front to back that allows us to know where kids are at, and then we can progress there. Like University of Iowa, what they do is they'll have like a Devo 1 group, and then they'll have so they used to have a Devo 1, Devo 2, and they'd have their develop, like they have an advanced, and they'd have like their like senior guys, and so they should be able to move through those programs to get a little bit more control and consistency with their movements. So those are some of our specific things in the beginning that we use. And then as we continue to move forward with some of that, I'm going to pull up another program. Like this kid here is a really good baseball player. So we started to move out of some of that. So then we actually go into how do we work on power. And so as we get moving, like he's a baseball player, but he also plays football. He's going to go play baseball in college. But like we do, barbell squat jumps. We'll do elevated clean pulls, hang cleans. I don't do a lot from the floor. That's more of a personal preference. It depends on everybody. But sometimes people want to do a lot of things from the floor. There's a lot of teaching points from a power clean position. So I don't do that. I do clean pulls. We'll do some hand clean type stuff. I like doing dumbbell snatch. It tells me how are they with getting out of that explode position. We need that bar or that, the dumbbell to stay really close to the body so we can get underneath that a little bit quicker. So these are all simple little things that we use in our program. Like I said, things a little bit different is we will do some banded rotation type stuff. Farmer's carry, some of those are like, basic staple type things. Nordic hamstring curls. What we know, especially from ACL injuries, the best way that we can reduce that risk is by doing more hamstring strengthening. So the more you can really work on that, the better off you'll be. In my practice, in terms of the physical therapy side of things, I see a ton of ACLs. So in the last 6 years, I've seen over 200 ACL injuries. And so what we try and do is really hit that endurance strengthening harder. Some of the research is coming out, and it's really saying that from our side of it, in terms of the rehab, the return to sport, it's not very continuous. So once kids get done with their injury, sometimes their PT just says, oh, well, you've matched some of these tests and you do okay with them, so then we're just going to go. And we're just going to let you go back into it. It's not really the best way that should go. It's not the most consistent way, but it's just kind of the way that people are doing it because there's not a lot of guidelines in terms of how we should push it. So we do, with my athletes, they go through their PT side of it, and then they go back and they actually do a sports performance group that's led by one of our coaches. She has her master's strength conditioning, and she runs it from a standpoint that we actually sit down and we look at what their deficiencies are. They pass most of the tests that we need for a return to play, but they're missing, specific little things. So then we just go this way. So that's where the specific strength training, for the injury prevention and also the return to sport can also help. So we go for especially for hamstrings and glutes, it's more endurance type strengthening type exercises, and so that's what we use primarily for most of our athletes. As you can see, like Nordic hamstring curls are pretty tough. Like if we're going to do like a single leg hamstring curl with like a stability ball, it would be 3 sets of 10, 15, 20. We try to go up 25 or 30, and so we really hit that hamstring. So we try, like I said, with that single leg stuff, we like that because then when they're doing it, they can't really fake it. So either they can do it or they can't. There's like really no in between. So that's really one of the main reasons also that we try and do some of that as well. From a football specific program, I'm going to pull up another one. So here is,
Coach, in that portion with the RFESS,
yep.
Do you, Coach asked, do you eccentrically load it and/or isometrically load it later in the program?
So I don't do a lot of isometric type stuff. Most of the reason why is because I want people to strengthen all the way through that range of motion. So isometric type stuff, eccentric, yeah. As people get going into it, I don't know if people have ever seen a K-box. It's basically flywheel training. Like we have one of those in the clinic. We like that eccentric stuff. So you can do like a eccentric like 5-second count and then really focus on the explode out of it. So that works too. It just kind of depends on the person and how they will tolerate some of that. Eccentric, sometimes you have to, especially if you're going a little bit heavier, you'll have to be careful. That rhabdo is something that people get a little bit nervous about. So you'll have to just kind of pay attention to that. So, but that's definitely something we'll put into it. So this is Jalen. He's a football player, actually plays for Coach Hammer. And so he is a very, very talented athlete. We need to get him a little bit stronger. So we have, we actually have him doing a belt squat. Part of that is because we're not going to go crazy heavy. Or if you look at our, reps and sets, it's not a ton, but it's going to allow us to be a little bit more explosive, and I don't have to worry about the bar as much. And so that's a really good one.
Coach, you just have to switch the screen again.
Oh, I've got more than one. Okay. You guys see that one? Do you see that it says Jalen number 2?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Okay. So this one says belt squat. So like I said, like with him, we like to be able to use some explosive type stuff, but then not have to necessarily worry about the load that's on the person. So we can really be as explosive out of the bottom end of that squat as we possibly can. So like I said, our reps and sets aren't very high, but it's going to allow us to really push the load, but also the explosiveness. We will, like I said, we do a lot of supersets. So we pair this with our lateral hurdle hops. We can do single leg hops. Really any of that stuff is really good for our athletes. So we do like a single leg. This is like an eccentric lowering position. So like a single leg box lower. And so he doesn't have a foot on the ground. So it really pulls in his stability. Reverse hyper. So that can be just like a extension, like hip extension basically. And so we have a reverse hyper machines. And then we do rotation med ball slings. So a lot of things, and I actually put this on there too. When we do our stability stuff, we try and have them doing it most of it, especially with a lot of our athletes play another sport. Is we do a lot of our strength training core stuff as in much of an elongated position as possible. So when we get in that elongated position, it allows us to put them in, like if they're going to do like a layup or if they're going to doing shots or whatever it might be, they're going to be more in that elongated position. So they'll be able to withstand some of those, the pushing, the pulling, and like the contact within their sport. So Jalen actually is a receiver. So being able to put him in a position where he's going to be successful, in his position, this is our way of being a little bit more sport specific, but this is kind of what we do for our athletes. So our day 2, elevated clean pulls again. Squat prep is a global mobility position. Dumbbell push press, we have a chest supported row. Like I said, this is a 5-second hold, so this is kind of that isometric a little bit. But then we'll do out of that position, we'll do up in the hold, up in that top position, but then we'll do a slow lowering, so it gets to more of the eccentric. Barbell landmine, because it's a stability with movement exercises as well. What other questions do we have?
Nothing at the moment, Coach. If anybody has one, though, any questions, man, feel free to hit the chat box.
Let's see. Pull up another. Here is. I'm going to share a new one here. I think the biggest thing from my side of it, from my standpoint, is when we have these athletes that come in, it's how can we evaluate them as we go through it. And evaluation is really one of the things, especially for you guys sometimes too, is my screen sharing stop, sorry. Yeah. Now, can you guys see that when it says Isaiah at the top?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So the evaluation piece, I mean, we have this when we run strength training at 2 high schools and we consult with another one. When you have that mass number of kids, sometimes that evaluation piece is pretty tough. That's also one of the reasons why we do some of these standardized programs in the beginning. It allows us to have a little bit more of that evaluation piece without having to go through, most people know what an FMS is, or a functional movement screen. If you don't have a staff that's really trained, or you have people that you can rely on, going through a functional movement screen just isn't practical. University of Iowa, they actually created their own functional movement screen. They went hook, line, and sinker on the FMS for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, and then they kind of switched. And they kind of did their own because it just wasn't giving them all the things they need to know. You guys, if you have a staff of maybe it's 5 or 10, but only half of them really know anything about strength conditioning, doing an FMS or doing some of those things are just tough, and you don't always know what to do with it. That's why we do some of these programs. That's exactly what we did with Central DeWitt High School, which is a smaller high school. We had I think we had 250 kids show up for that first week for the strength training side of it, which is huge. And we took them over last summer, and we got them to go through some of these programs because then it gave us an idea. I don't know if people ever use Team Builder, but Team Builder is another way you can use rack, different apps that can help you with some of the putting a tablet on the racks, and allow you to do some of those positions. But by doing this, it gives you that position or that ability to have an idea of, okay, this kid does this. And then you can actually subset your groups. This is what I usually suggest to some of our bigger high schools, is subset your groups and saying, okay, well, these kids don't do squats very well. So then this group should all come in at this time, if that's possible, especially during summer training, or have them start on different programs. So the kids that are deficient in their squat, mobility stuff, they need to do these, pre-exercise before we get into our performance training. So that's what we've kind of gone to, just because you don't always have enough, staff, to be able to be in there with all those athletes.
There's a couple of questions here, Coach, and we were kind of touching on it, but Coach asked the best tip that you would give a coach for group training.
Okay, so it always depends on the size of the group. So when your group gets really, really large, we try and, based on the number of racks we have, say Central DeWitt. So based on the number of racks we have and the number of iPads, we try not to have any more than, I think it's 42 athletes in the room, because we can fit 4 athletes to a rack based on the tablet that we have on there. So then they can use the Team Builder app, so that it tracks their weights and strength training, all that stuff. But then we have different, like our supersets that are set up. So sometimes we would have like our 1A program, our 1A lift is like our main lift for the day. So whether that's like a back squat, or it's hand cleans, or it's whatever it might be. Sometimes kids don't do that first. We try not to fatigue that neuromuscular system a ton. So we try and plan a way to we have kids set up and be as efficient as possible when they are spread out. So trying to figure out how many stations you can have, and then how can that be as efficient as possible moving from one group to the next.
And here's another question for you. Do you work on mobility separately, or do you incorporate it in the workout with supersets? What is your philosophy on that in general?
So we know that from a philosophy standpoint, from myself, I don't do a ton of like just static stretching in the beginning. I'll run that in the group, like in their superset, and then they also do at the end of it, they do what's called a Fantastic Four. It's a group of 4 stretches, and so it gets hips, quads, groin, and then also hamstrings. And so they do that afterwards, after they've done their workout. It takes them 6 minutes, and then they walk out the door. So we try not to have them do a ton of static stretching. Static stretching just doesn't have, a ton of place in, I would say, in most people's programs. Just from a time factor, a lot of times, depending on how you're trying to do the lifting, it's just not even a real big feasible part, because you probably going to have people come in, try and maybe do a little bit of tissue mobility. So whether that's foam rolling, that's using a lacrosse ball, whatever it might be. They'll go through dynamic warm up, and then they'll go into some movement prep type stuff. So whether that's, you can do kettlebell swings, you can do hurdle jumps, things like that. And then like in his so this is Isaiah's program. I don't have any in his because he became pretty mobile. So I worked with Isaiah. He's going to go play Division I basketball at Colorado State. And so I don't have any in his specific program, because this would be his 5th program. So this, I would have worked with him for 5 months, right up until he went into school. And so his first 2 or 3 months, he did global mobility stuff within it. One of the other programs I had like squat prep, or it said like half kneeling groin stretch. I'll do that and pair that with, like if we're doing rear foot elevated split squats, or if we're doing like our barbell split squats or back squat, that'll be their second part of their superset. So that's how I'll put that in there, but it's not something that's going to take up a big portion of their program. So hopefully that answers it. I think that was kind of long-winded, but at least that gives you a little bit of an idea of what to do with that. Was there another question, or was that the second one?
No, that was the second question, Coach.
Okay. One of the things, especially going along with the kind of way we structure our programs, is that we actually standardize how we do our like from beginning to end. So when my athletes come in, they get warmed up. So sometimes people have them like run around the gym a couple times, or like in mine, if I have, depending on how many athletes I have coming in, they'll get on the bike for 5 minutes, or on a row, or whatever it might be. And then after that, they do some tissue mobility, so foam roll, so hips, quads, hamstrings. Make sure we get into the glutes pretty well too, so we can get some good mobility. And then we'll do our injury prevention stuff. So we do some mini band movements. That isn't always feasible, mostly because sometimes it's just like a monetary thing, because mini bands, they break quite a bit, and then they're just expensive if you really get into that. Our groups, my groups I have 10 kids or 12 kids in my group, so I can do that. But just going through those specific movements are fine. So we do our mini bands, we do our side to side, like lateral walk, and then we'll do like a diagonal walk. And then we do forward and backwards, and then we get into our dynamic warm up. So then that's our high knees, butt kicks. And then we'll go high knee karaoke, reverse, so we'll go open hip skip, and then we do our reverse run. Then after that, then we split up, we have our different days. So like a day 1 is going to be our linear speed. Day 2 will be our change direction, and then day 3 may be our vertical day. But it just kind of depends on like how many times a week we see the kids. So if I only see a kid twice, we have a linear speed day. So we'll do our starts. So depending on what the kid is. So if it's a track athlete, or if we have a football player, they're going to be doing some combine or like showcase type things. We'll do some start stuff with them. And then we'll do like flying 10s, or we'll do as many of those short sprints. Now the thing with the sprinting stuff, a lot of times some people will think that we need to do a ton of them. I'd rather have full recovery, and then they get to their top end speed, and then that allows them to actually really push that top end speed. We also do our speed stuff using either we do a progression. So we'll do just from a static start position, and then we will really focus on mechanics along with, in the beginning of a program. So we do a lot of wall strikes. So we do just switches, and then we do some continuous running, really focus on getting that good, 45-degree angle forward, focus on that knee drive, because that's a lot of things. Like as kids get going, they kind of forget about that knee drive. There's a good video out there that was, they were on like a curved treadmill. There was a kid that was untrained and a kid like a high level sprinter. And just the amount of mobility that person shows in a high level sprinter, we want that their cycle to look kind of a little bit more like a circle. If you're untrained, it's going to look more like an oval. And so we really want to focus on that good knee drive, driving through that, push. We don't want kids to pull a ton. We want them to be a pusher. If you start to really pull a ton on that ground and really try and pull yourself forward, then what's going to happen is you're actually going to have an increased risk for your hamstring injuries. So really want to focus on, I don't know if you can see it, so it's getting up into here. So it's going to be up higher, so really focus on that and then come down. The sweet spot of your foot strike when you're doing your running isn't like a foot and a half in front of you. So it's actually between that 8 and 10, 12, it's 6 to 10 inches in front of the other foot is the way it goes, is that you want that to, that's where it comes in a little bit more of a circle instead of reaching and being more of an oval position. So really work on those mechanics, and then we'll get into our flies. We're going to get band resisted. We'll do sleds if we need to. I'm not always a huge fan of pushing sleds. I'll do pull sleds. It allows you to keep that those good elbow angles when you are doing your runs. One of the things that we went to the Track and Football Consortium, which is actually Chris Corfus, and then I can't think of the other guy's name, but they run a really good program. They do them in Chicago, and then they started doing them all over the place. And so that's really a good place that we have kind of changed our philosophy on the running side of it, really focusing on those arm mechanics, focusing on that top end sprint speed.
Question for you, Coach.
Yeah.
Do you feel like with the running portion and accelerating and sprinting and all that, do you feel like guys or athletes more struggle with the actual knee drive or the turnover that your leg is going to get or your foot?
So it depends on the person. So I really feel like I think it's going to be kind of an interesting answer, but I think that when you have those athletes, especially your linemen, they're going to deal with a little bit more of like that turnover, just because they're a lot more heavy-footed. Like we had a kid that he starts at University of Iowa. He was their starting guard this year. That's one of the things that they've really worked on him with too, is be able to get those feet going quicker. The kids that you really focus on that knee drive with are your top end, like your skills guys, because that's going to increase their top end speed, especially with what we want from our slot kids, or our receivers, our running backs. We want those kids to get that top end speed and get it quickly, and that's why we really focus on that knee drive with them. The linemen, we do what we can. Some of them it's just a genetic thing, and some kids are just not going to get that. So hopefully that kind of answers that. When you stay with the running philosophy type stuff, especially with the arm movements, we listen to Carl Lewis. He won 8 gold medals, so obviously I feel like he knows what he's doing. He's also a sprint coach and track coach at Houston. And so that was one of the biggest things, is when he talked to us about that, is when you are focusing on those arms, if you don't get that arm back, a lot of times kids will actually extend the elbow. We want them to get that elbow back up. And then because if you don't, what happens if you do this, your opposite foot is then going to have to change to balance yourself out a little bit. So we want to get here and then be able to drive through. So focus on driving your elbows. So when they're doing their high knees, their butt kicks, all those things, focus on arm swing and arm elbow movement, because that will help them a ton. That'll get them in that position even better. So that's what we really push. And whether you are you run track, you play football, you play basketball, you play volleyball, whatever it is, we have all of our kids sprint, because there's nothing I can do for you to generate that much power than sprinting. And then we can change in terms of doing some resisted sprinting, and then we can do the resisted sprinting to running after that. And so almost like do some superset type stuff to get a little bit more potentiation. A lot of questions about pad in terms of overspeed training or resisted training. I don't do a lot of the overspeed at all. Part of that is because, as my mind works, when we put a kid on a treadmill and put the treadmill as fast as it can go, and then the kid's trying to keep up with it, that's not the way that life works. That's not the way, like when you get on the track's not moving. The football field isn't moving. So for us to be able to produce more power, put it in the ground, and then push that, that linear force going forward, we do either resisted training or resisted running. So that's either with band resisted, that's with chutes, that's with a sled, or we actually have we have treadmills that don't have a motor on it. And so we like you can use the curved treadmills. So that's either like Woodway has a really good one, or like we have assault runners. And so with those, then that person has to create that power. It actually has a little bit of strain on the hamstring as well. So it's a little bit of a hamstring, training program as well. But we like that just because it's a little bit safer, but then it's also the carryover is higher. The research also would support that as well. And kids can continue to have their same mechanics. That mechanics, once the kid once they start to lose their mechanics when they're doing that or that training with like a curved treadmill, then we have to back them down, and then we actually start to limit them and say you can only go to 15 miles per hour or 60 miles per hour, whatever it might be, because of the mechanics side of it. We don't want them to go so fast. The same thing with going too high of weight. If you start losing mechanics, then the weight doesn't really matter because the risk and reward is not in balance anymore. So that's what we do from our programs there. We do have some different exercises. Go ahead.
No, I was going to ask, when it comes to getting kids prepared for combines, and just say focus on the 40-yard dash, when you're really training a kid for that, how much focus goes into the stance and start compared to the rest of it?
So the stance and start is actually is quite a bit of it. I mean, especially like you think about like high-level sprinters, the kids that or the high-level sprinters that do a really good job of getting out of their start they do far and away do better. Those are your best sprinters in the world that do great because their start is fantastic. So we have a very diverse staff, but we're also extremely fortunate. One of our head coaches, he actually does all the strength training at one of our colleges. His name's Adam Hinders. He was a Division I All-American in the 4 and the 8. So when I have kids that really need to get just some specific work on the sprint skills and stuff, we send them to him. We say, can you just do one session with this kid because they need specific things to be looked at. But from a 40 position, it's imperative that they really focus out of that drive, out of that stance, and when we go into that modified sprinter stance, being able to make sure that when you are, so I can definitely show you this one. So when kids are in that position, think about these are my feet. What usually happens is that drive foot actually will step sideways a little bit more, and then the next step, just inherently, the only way you can do it is the next step has to be in the outside. And this is the same stuff that we look at from efficiency with like even our change of direction stuff. Focus on your foot. So if my feet are like this and I'm going to drive and I'm going to push forward, if this one is coming out to the side, then the other one has to go out to the other side to balance yourself out. And then that's not efficient because it's going side to side. We want all of our force to be going straight forward. And so that's something that we really, really work on with our kids is making sure that when they come out of that stance, everything's got to be straightforward. It's like a fight in a phone booth. And you have to be able to go get those feet going straight forward. And then it's those hands. You have to drive. It's got to be almost like an explosive movement. So like some people say like that kid's getting shot out of a cannon. That's really what it has to be. So right from the beginning, and this is one of the things that they do even talk about at Iowa. If you can't get big enough steps to really propel yourself and be explosive enough, your 40 time won't be where you need it to be just because you can't produce enough power. And that's why we do so much power stuff with like our clean pulls and all those things, because those are those positions we need kids to get out of. So what they tell people is you need to get 3 steps in 5 yards and 5 steps in 10 yards. And so that's really what we work on. That's our goal. Pat Anger was a Division I All-American, and then he played for the Colts. And then he actually lives in our area, and we're really good friends with him. And he comes out and helps some of our guys and trains with them. And he and I have done some different programs together. And that's one of the big things that they really push, and they still do it, to this day. They are at the University of Iowa. The nice thing about that is they're very meat and potatoes. So they don't have to have, all of these, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of systems. Let's really focus on you doing the right things really well, and then going from there. And then that's the way we do it. And so that's really from my combines, position. So whether that's your 40, your pro agility, your vertical, we really look at those mechanical type things from the beginning. You look at a vertical. If you can't get your feet set and be able to come straight up out of that position, if your feet are too wide, if you can't get those, get yourself down low enough to be able to use that stretch, shortening cycle, then you're not going to perform some of those tests very well. So that leads me back into why we do some of our specific programs, is because then I know that they can do those specific things they're going to have to use later on in their testing. Like, so if they're going to do like a combine or like the showcase. But that's what we do with all of our, whether you're a baseball player, you're a football player, you are a volleyball player. We do all those same things, and you change up the programs based on each individual kid. But our movement patterns and what we really want to get out of those kids are the same. Number one, and some people are going to say, well, it's a cookie-cutter program. Well, that's not the reason why we do it. I do it because it's reproducible. Because if it's not reproducible, then I have so many variables that I don't know about and I can't control. That's the same thing with my return to sports and our PT stuff. People will say, well, you're having a lot of kids do some of the same stuff. Yeah, because I know what they're going to get out of it. I know the position, the muscle they need to be using. They're going to understand how to use single leg strength and what that does for them. And when they're coming into an acceleration or deceleration, think about a receiver that's coming in and going to do a curl route. So he's going to have to come in, he's going to have to chop his feet, but that's deceleration. That's exactly what that is. But then it's also making sure they put that foot and they push that foot into the ground at the right position, so that makes their turn, and so they're opening back up to the middle, right? Their turn is better, and it's the least amount of stress on their knee as possible. But we teach that stuff because we know they're going to have to do that in sport. So the more times you can get some of that repetition, the better off you're going to be. You are going to have some of those times where the kid gets their foot stuck in the ground and some kid runs into it. There's nothing you can do about that. It's just the way it goes. But how can you decrease those risks? It's by doing, as much of these specific movements as possible. So we definitely, we try and, minimize our risk and our variation in the programs as possible by doing this stuff. And like I said, this is what our kids, from top to bottom do. When I have a kid come into our programs, even at like St. Ambrose University or Augustana College, we do some of the same stuff. And part of it's because you never know what a kid's going to come in with. And that's the same reason why Iowa, created their own movement pattern system that they use for their evaluation tool, because then they can put the kids into, okay, you're a Devo 1, you're a Devo 2, and then have a little bit more control over it. So their staffs are different and they're bigger, and they can do that. If you don't have that size of staff, but if you are that fortunate, then you have that ability to put yourself into some of those positions. So come up with whatever is standard, and then we do kind of like in the PT side of it, we do a test, retest. If you're not testing enough, you're not seeing where kids are at, then that doesn't show, you're not going to be able to have enough progress. And one of the questions that's come up, like we were meeting with the AD at Central DeWitt, which is one of our schools. His son plays for the Denver Broncos, and he was talking about, because he played at the University of Iowa, and then he was talking about, what's our testing look like? How many times a year are we going to test? And so we like to, test our kids out, at least 4 times if we can, sometimes 6, depending on how many sports they're in. If we have a kid that only plays one sport, let's test them out a little bit more. And we can get a little bit more data on them and what they can do. But it just has to be a program that, even in season, have it be a program, program. Even if you can only do, like Excel sheet, like what I do with some of our kids, like Team Builder, like what Nick does with Central DeWitt. That's great. Not everybody has that available to them. So have a program that is specific to that kid. So you have to print out some sheets, but you can make it 6 weeks long. And so every 6 weeks you have to print it out, but at least allows you to be able to track those kids. How are they doing with each, set? Are they actually, producing or, creating, the movements and actually, being successful with each lift? If they're not, then maybe you need to change that a little bit. You need to change their position, or you need to change their weights. And so like with ours, like this one, you can come in here. So like we have our maxes. You can put their name, you put in their maxes, and it actually just populates. So we can come into here, and then you can put their maxes in there. So for him, it's really nice. And Jeff, my business partner, he's the one that creates all this. He's really good with the Excel sheets, but it allows you to be able to track some of these kids. No matter what sport you are, like I consult with a team, school, and they're really good in this area. but they just would write stuff on the board. And so by doing it off the board, the only problem with that is you don't have a lot of control, and you don't have a good way to actually track what these kids are. This gives you a little bit more control over it. So,
Coach, when you're testing, are you one rep maxing, or how are you guys handling that?
I would tell you that I'm not a huge fan of one rep maxing, especially with younger kids. Younger kids is just not a good way to do it. If you go to, like, on Twitter, follow a guy by the name of it's Lancer Strength, at Lancer Strength, and his name is Tony Stewart. He's a fantastic strength coach. He's a strength coach at North Scott High School, and that's a high school that's really bought into it. I mean, they built the lab, is what they call it, and it's unreal, just the amount of stuff that they have in there. But they bought into it. But the thing that he does with a lot of athletes, especially when they're younger, he does Dr. Yes's. He has like a Yes's program, and so it's a 1x20. So it's 20 different exercises. They do 20 reps. But the way that I'm bringing my athletes that are like return to sport, I basically do the same type of things in terms of the number of reps. I just do a different number of sets. But that's a way to do it. Is I would say you can progress your kids that way, a little bit more standardized. But from my standpoint, in terms of the testing stuff, when we do test our athletes, I'm not a huge fan of one rep, because depending on their age, like I was kind of getting out with the yes and stuff, a lot of them won't be able to test very well, because of one rep, they're going to be so far out of their mechanical advantage, or they're moving so much it's just not actually the safest way to do it. So we go to a 3 to 5 rep, especially depending on the kid. At Bettendorf High School, we have, a kid he's already committed to go to the University of Iowa. It's a super, super strong kid. Could he probably do, a 1 rep max and be really safe with it and smart with it? Yes. But it's just not everybody. And so that's what makes it a little bit harder. So we try and go to that 3 to 5 rep. And we even do that in the college, level, because, Division III, you don't always know what you're going to get. Sometimes you get a really high-level athlete, and sometimes you get a kid that they're doing it because they want to be a part of something. So, so that from a testing standpoint, I would go 3 to 5 and just play it safer. And then once you kind of identify some of those athletes that are going to be able to tolerate a 1 rep, then that's fine. The thing that I would also say, and I try to do a really good job of this, is we don't, like, if you look at a lot of our stuff, like with Isaiah, he didn't lift his school just because there was too big of a number, and he also knew he was going to go to Division I and wanted a little bit more specific, attention. But with our program and our kids, we don't do the main lifts. So we don't do back squats. We don't do power cleans. We don't do hang cleans a lot with most of our kids, because we want them lifting at school. And we do like kind of the stuff that allows us to fill in the gaps. So if we've got a lot of kids that are, so they're still playing football or playing baseball or basketball or whatever, we put in different like kind of filler exercises that are going to help them do a little bit more force development stuff. We do, the jumping, the mechanics, a lot of those types of things, but we won't do the heavy, lifts that they're going to be doing at school, because it's just overloading them. And at some point, are we going to help be the cure, or are we going to be part of the problem? And I think, from the injury prevention person inside of me, or injury reduction person, is usually our younger athletes, we're expecting a ton out of them. They're going to play 60, 70, 80 games a year. At that age, their body is not able to tolerate that many games and that much, stress on their joints and their muscles and, tendons. So we need to support that from the strength side of it. And so this is going to hopefully help decrease, some of the things, the risk, so we also have to kind of figure out what's our way to, help with this. And part of it is we don't, overload the kids. From a philosophy standpoint, this is another little thing tidbit for me, is if you are going to be doing a lot of vertical, a lot of jumping stuff, you need to do that right away. So if you are going to do a lot of jumping things, don't wait until the end of your program. The neuromuscular system really doesn't, it has a finite level for all the times. Like if I'm going to work a kid out, if I'm going to be in with him an hour, he's not going to be able to do 100%, vertical, leap type stuff all the way through his program for an hour. It just won't work. So do a lot of those jumping and those repetition type things in the beginning. So we'll do like a split squat, and then we'll go to and do like a single leg box jump, or we'll do broad jumps or whatever it might be. We're looking for some potentiation, but it's like I'll do 3 or 4 or 5 reps for the actual strength side of it, and then the jumping is like 2 reps. I'm looking for that potentiation, but I'm also knowing that at some point I'm going to reach the max level for that neuromuscular system. and eventually it's just not going to tolerate anything else. And so then your output is going to go down. That's why a lot of people have started doing a little bit more of the velocity-based training. We do a little bit of it. Most of the people that we work with just don't have enough of a mindset for that, and the kids just aren't exposed to it, so we don't do a ton of it. Like Mark, who I work with, he is really good at that type of stuff, and because I use it at Iowa. So if I say, well, I want this to be 1.2 meters per second, he would understand that. Most people won't understand that, and they just don't understand what that force velocity curve actually looks like and how they only use that to our advantage. So.
Good deal. If anybody has any questions for Coach, and while if anybody is coming up with any, do you want to share your contact information, Coach, whether it's Twitter handle, email, if anybody has any follow-up questions?
Right. So, and like I was telling Justin before too, if you guys want programs, if you guys want like, oh, this is like, what are the basic things you work on? Or I'm not a monger that's just going to keep all that to myself. So I'm trying to help out as many people as we can. So I'm more than willing to send that to you. So for Twitter, it's at Rokes PT. So you guys said on Twitter, there's ROKES PT at gmail.com. And then we're on Facebook. So the Athlete Development Project is what we do right now, especially in a setting or a scenario where we can't do a lot of in-person training. We're actually doing a ton of stuff online. So actually, once you get on with you guys, I'm going to do a Facebook Live video where I'll actually talk to everybody and say, this is the things that we are going to do. We're going to be doing some live workouts. But if you guys have questions or need some help with some of that stuff, always. And part of it is sometimes people think we need to have the latest and greatest in terms of equipment. That's not the way it has to go. You just need to have a little bit of a imagination. You're really only limited by what you have in the room and your imagination, not what you have in the room. So use that to your advantage. And then, that's like Ben Hammer. I know we both know him. He just doesn't have, when they have the meat and potatoes, they don't have Vertimaxes. They don't have a lot of glute hams. They don't have all those things. So how can you utilize this stuff? If you have some space, space is actually your biggest thing. If you have a really small room, sometimes that makes things a little bit tougher. But like Ben has a ton of space.
Yeah.
Utilize it. You can do step ups. You can do eccentric stuff. You can do reverse elevated split squats. You can do all those little things that allow you to be successful.
That's awesome. No, I definitely appreciate you coming on, Coach. A ton of great information. Yeah, if you have any of these that you're willing to share, the email I sent you, if you send it there, then I'll throw it in the drive for these guys to just take advantage of. I think that'd be awesome, and because I'm sure a lot of people are going to ask about some of that information. So if we could just put it in a set spot, I think it'd make your job a lot easier too than sending out a ton of emails. So I'd love to get that stuff. I'd love to check it out for myself as well. So does anyone have any last minute questions? Feel free to reach out, whether via email or Twitter. Ask any questions you got. Like Coach said, this is a time where, we're learning from each other that, definitely reach out and we got to be more creative with certain things that we're doing just with the time at hand. So, lean on each other for that, for sure.
Right. And I think one of the things that, like I mentioned, Tony Stewart, he's, like I said, he's a great resource as well. Sometimes what we've had coaches ask is like, do you do a lot of conditioning with your athletes? Honestly, if they are playing more than, say that they're playing a couple sports, and especially if they're in season in a sport, I'm not doing any conditioning with kids. Conditioning is one of those things where you can do too much of it. If it's a kid that's only playing football, and so then we're in the winter, we're in the spring, yeah, we're going to do some conditioning with that kid. That makes sense. Slide boards, or we're going to do cut at E5s, we're going to do different things, whatever it might be. But we don't do a lot of conditioning because you should be getting that in their sport. And so at some point you're just going to overload that kid, and if you really want them to reach their potential strength-wise, kind of have to figure it out. So if I'm pushing the max in conditioning and also the strength stuff, I'm not going to get that much out of the kid.
No, that's a great point. That's a great point. Well, Coach, I definitely thank you for coming on and spending some time with us this afternoon. And, like I said, if you could send that over to me, I'll make sure to get it in the drive for these guys.
Perfect. Yeah, for sure. If you guys have any questions, let me know, and appreciate the time.